Imagine you're one of the 186 million people worldwide impacted by infertility, and part of the 2.5 million fortunate enough to resort to in vitro fertilization. Commonly known as IVF, it's one of the most common and successful treatments to infertility, where an egg is removed from the woman's ovaries and fertilized with sperm in a laboratory. That fertilized egg, called an embryo, is then returned to the woman's womb to grow and develop. Over 12 million babies have been born through IVF since the first IVF birth in 1978, and clinicians perform more than 2.5 million IVF cycles each year, resulting in over 500,000 deliveries. But for some people, something so magical has turned into a nightmare due to an act called fertility fraud.
Fertility fraud.
They're not just half-siblings, but also victims of fertility fraud.
Her biological father is actually her mother's OBGYN.
Your whole sense of identity changed in the blink of an eye.
Welcome back to Injustigate. My name is Justin Sullivan, and I'm a journalist based out of Buffalo, New York, who's covered everything from murder trials to chicken laws, here to talk about everything you never knew you were curious about. So without further ado, let the investigation begin. Fertility fraud has increased rapidly in recent years with the commercialization of at-home DNA testing kits like 23andMe and Ancestry.com. And with that increase came new expansions of the crime. While fertility fraud is often described as the misuse of sperm, eggs, and embryos, particularly when a healthcare professional substituting their own sperm for donor sperm, there are many other types of fertility fraud. And they may take place at various stages of the IVF process. Other versions of fertility fraud include competing for patients via misleading information about success rates, either in advertising or during personal interviews, performing an assisted reproductive technology procedure not covered by insurance and then billing for a different procedure, performing unnecessary or futile procedures on patients who are misinformed or poorly informed, false claims of pregnancy followed by assertions of fetal death, inadequate screening of donors, and the embezzlement from sperm banks, theft of human eggs, which is egg snatching, or embryos, or use of eggs without consent. While every case of fertility fraud is slightly different, every report has prompted the same question: why? As cases often decades old continue to pop up, it's clear that that answer isn't exactly black and white. One of the most prominent cases of fertility fraud was the case of Dr. Donald Klein, an Indianapolis-based fertility doctor and leader in the infertility industry. The accusations against Dr. Klein began in 2014 when a woman named Jacoba Ballard, an only child, took a 23andMe DNA test and found out that she had 7 half-siblings. Ballard reportedly knew that she had been conceived via IVF, but was not expecting any more than 3 siblings, as it was what her mother, Debbie Pierce, agreed to with Dr. Klein when she was a client of his in the early 1980s. Debbie wanted a male sperm donor who had dark features to match her husband, who was Jacoba's father. So when Jacoba went to Klein with questions and was pushed away, her suspicions increased, especially because her newfound half-siblings all had light hair, blue eyes, and Euro-American features. Jacoba's father had brown hair and a darker complexion. As the number of half-siblings increased, so did one thing in common. Their mothers were all clients of Dr. Donald Klein. The donors' offsprings all had a variety of medical issues, something that would have made that individual ineligible to donate to begin with. It was not until a mutual sucking cousin matched with the siblings where they learned the truth many had been fearing. The donated sperm was from Dr. Donald Klein himself. Jacoba and several of the siblings reported Klein to the Attorney General. However, authorities struggled to charge him with any crime as, in the eyes of the law, he was providing a service agreed upon between him and the respective families. As more and more half-siblings began to pop up, Klein eventually admitted to inseminating women with his own donations out of desperation to help families conceive children, even if it meant passing off his donation as that of a lawyer or a medical student. Klein cited one of the most traditional causes of fertility fraud, which is doctors' desperation to provide successful procedures and stay in business, despite limited samples, which are still never guaranteed to help conceive a child. In the Netflix film Our Father, which follows Jacoba and the other siblings' fight, it is suspected that Klein became a religious fanatic after accidentally striking and killing a little girl when he was younger. It is suggested that Klein's affiliation with an extremist Christian movement called Quiverful, which only reportedly has around 10,000 followers, follows strict gender roles. Women often don't cut their hair, wear pants, work outside the home, or question their husband's authority. A writer named Artemis Stardust documented their experience growing up in a family that followed Quiverful, writing candidly and vulnerably in a personal essay about the traumatic experience, which was featured on TLC's Kid by the Dozen. Stardust, who starred on the show alongside their family, the Jupe family, recounted how their upbringing was shaped by rigid religious beliefs, emotional manipulation, and exploitation, and how this affected their mental health and cost them their relationships with their younger siblings. Klein ultimately pled guilty to 2 level 6 felony counts of obstruction of justice for lying to investigators, and received a 1-year suspended sentence and only a fine of $500. A slap on the wrist compared to the 6 years he was facing. His medical license was revoked in 2018, and as of 2022, he has paid out more than $1.35 million to settle 3 civil lawsuits filed individually by donor children and their families. Klein was ultimately revealed to be the father to 94 children. Many of them lived in the same town or grew up around one another, unaware of their genetics. And during the trial, the children's fear of them, or their offsprings, potentially inbreeding by accident, came to surface, revealing another layer of collateral victims. In an article in The Atlantic on the case, the writer really puts it into perspective, writing, "The donor children have begun cataloging the ways their own paths have crossed too. They're worried that their children are getting old enough to date soon." Continuing, Klein now looms over their kids' every innocent crush, every prom date. Several sources report that Klein's offsprings do stay in contact and plan reunion meetups with their respective families, which many do attend. However, Jacoba, the daughter who uncovered Klein's crimes, remains prepared for more half-siblings to potentially pop up. She has said several times that she feels guilt over having to be the one to explain to a child and their parent that they have been victimized. Even with all the evidence against him, Donald Klein still had letters of support written about him during his trial. Several other of Klein's donor-conceived children have been interviewed alongside their mothers, and it's interesting how respectfully different they view the situation, with some equating it to a sexual assault, while others view it as just something that had to be done to conceive a child and start a family. That spectrum is one of the contributing factors that makes fertility fraud so difficult to legislate and illegalize. But it is also important to remember that there are more victims out there who have no idea that they've been victimized, much less by a medical professional who they trusted. Currently, there is no federal law against fertility fraud, and only around a dozen states have their own legislation, including Indiana, who was the first state to do so, due to the efforts of the children conceived as the result of Donald Klein's malpractice. Indiana's fertility fraud makes misrepresentation related to a medical procedure or human reproductive material an automatic level 6 felony. It also allows victims to file a civil lawsuit against a doctor within 5 years of discovering they're a victim of fertility fraud or a doctor's confession. While the exact global number is difficult to determine as well due to a historical lack of regulation and reporting, over 50 U.S. fertility doctors have been accused of fertility fraud, with around 500 cases of insemination fraud being discovered worldwide. From personal identity crises, medical uncertainty, and mistrust to potentially never-ending fears of inbreeding, fertility fraud is not only criminal and unethical, but personal to its ever-growing generation of survivors. Thank you to everyone who's tuned into my second episode. I greatly appreciate it. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and comment your opinions. I'd love to hear them. So until next time, stay tuned and stay curious.